My name is Maren Larson. I pour foundations for a living. And 4 days after I buried my husband, I stood on a porch I had framed with my own hands, holding a key that no longer fit the lock. My winter coats were on that porch too, in contractor bags. He'd used my bags, 39 cents a piece, out of my own truck. Grief comes in waves. Nobody warns you it can come with a locksmith's invoice taped to your storm door. The door opened from the inside before I finished knocking on wood. I'd hung. Colton stood in the frame in his father's barn jacket, the canvas one with the burn hole in the cuff. He held up a photocopy the way a man holds a badge he found in a drawer. "Dad's will," he said. 2009. It all comes to me. I told him that paper was 4 years older than my marriage. Across the road, Ray and Louise Odell raked leaves they'd already raked. 40 minutes at it. Colton looked at them, then pitched his voice to Carrie. "And that's the part I need you to hear." He waited for an audience. "My father's name is on this land," he said. "You were the woman who lived here. That's not the same thing. Maren." I stood very still. In my trade, when something cracks under load, you don't jump. You stand where you are and you listen, because the sound tells you where the failure started, and the failure never starts where the noise is loudest. So I listened. A storm door I'd installed, a rake stopping across the road, my own name in a mouth that had called me my husband's wife for 12 years and nothing else. And underneath it, the thing I'd spent 12 years not hearing a house built with my money had been sitting under another man's name the whole time. And everyone in Harrow Bend had gotten comfortable with that, including me. Especially me. I didn't raise my voice, and it wasn't strength, I was doing arithmetic. 31 years around job sites teaches you the man shouting on a porch is never the man holding the paper, and I didn't yet know what paper he held. Deputy Reyes pulled up 25 minutes later and did everything right. He read the photocopy front and back. He read my driver's license, and the address on it was the address of the porch we were standing on. He waited while I pulled up the county auditor's page on my phone and read that too. Long enough that I let myself believe it was working. Then he asked Colton something I hadn't thought to fear. "How long have you been living here?" "Sir, 8 months. Reyes looked at the mailbox, at the apartment over the garage, at me, and something went out of his face. "Ma'am, he's been receiving mail here. He's got a bed here. I can't put a man out on the road tonight over a paper dispute. This is civil. You'll want a lawyer." I want to be fair to him. He wasn't lazy or bought. He was correct. I'd spend 9 weeks learning that in $500 increments. The law wasn't confused. It looked at my deed and at his mattress and chose the mattress. Because the law moves slower than a locksmith and doesn't care that you're right tonight. Reyes carried 2 bags to my truck. He didn't have to. He squared them in the bed so they wouldn't slide, said sorry with his eyes and not his mouth, and stood in my driveway with his hat off until I pulled out. 8 months. Go back with me. Wendell stood in our kitchen last February with his hat in his hands, like a man asking for a loan he knew he'd get. The apartment over the garage, he said, "Till Colton gets back on his feet." I said yes in under 4 seconds. I want you to hear that number. I've had a lot of time to count it since. 4 seconds. Not 4 days. I didn't ask what back on his feet meant. I didn't ask why a 35-year-old man who'd opened 2 bars needed his father's wife's garage. I said yes because telling Wendell no had never once been worth what it cost me. That yes was the only key he ever needed. Nobody broke into my house. Nobody picked a lock. I handed it to him myself, over a bowl of soup, and I felt generous doing it. I threw the last bags in the truck bed. On the passenger seat was a toolbox that had ridden there since Tuesday. Inside, under a coil of chalk line, my father's brass plumb bob. 2 letters stamped shallow in one side. I didn't take it out. I just knew it was there. Welcome back. If you're new here, this is where quiet women stop being quiet. Tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I read everyone, and stay with me, because the part everybody gets wrong is the part where I was legally right the whole time and it didn't save me. I drove away from a house I had built board by board, with one question riding shotgun. Since when does a house I paid for belong to a name I only borrowed? I held a hammer before I could ride a bike. My father was Anders Larsen, a Norwegian carpenter out of Ashtabula County, Ohio, where the Nordic families have been since the 1890s. They came for the ore boats and stayed for the timber, and there is still a church up in Kingsville that runs a porridge supper every October. He could read a warped board the way other people read a newspaper. From the summer I turned 11, my job was handing him nails and holding the dumb end of the tape measure. And my pay was a bottle of orange pop at 4 o'clock and the right to be told I'd done it wrong. He wasn't warm. I want to be accurate about him, because I've spent years since trying not to sand him smooth. He never said I love you. He said, measure it again. In that house, those were the same sentence. He died when I was 26. Heart, like every Larson man before him. He left me 3 things: a canvas roll of chisels, a 1989 Ford pickup with 240,000 miles on it, and a brass plumb bob. He gave me the plumb bob first, though, a year before he died, the day my contractor's license came in the mail. He didn't say congratulations. He came out of the shop wiping his hands, and he set it in my palm the way you'd hand somebody a bird. And he said this: a level you can fool. Kiddo, tip the bench, tip the bubble. This one you can't. It doesn't measure what you tell it to. It only answers to gravity. Every wall you ever raise is going to want to lean. Your job isn't to argue with it. Your job is to check. Then he went back inside, and we never spoke about it again. There are 2 letters stamped into one side of it. He did that himself, with a center punch, and badly. I've had 18 years to get used to how crooked they sit. In 2011, I bought 7 acres on the east edge of Harrow Bend. $74,000. I know how that sounds for Ohio dirt. It had road frontage on Beckwith, and power and water were already run to the line, which is the whole difference between a lot and a field. And that difference costs about what you'd expect. It was mostly hayfield, with a stand of black walnut along the north line and a rise in the middle that caught the morning. Every dollar of it was mine. Savings, mostly. The rest came from selling my father's Ford. That hurt worse than the down payment did. I sat in it in the driveway for 20 minutes before the man came for it, and I didn't cry. And I've wondered since whether that was strength or just more of the family disease. People asked why a single woman needed 7 acres. I heard it at the bank, at church, from a cousin at Thanksgiving who meant well and did damage anyway. I told them the truth every time, and I never once softened it. I was going to build my own house one day, with my own 2 hands. On land with my own name on the deed. Understand that I was 30 years old, saying that out loud in a town where women's names go on the second line of things. Some of those people laughed. Some of them wrote me a check for a job 3 years later, which is its own kind of laughing. Hold on to that sentence. In about 11 years, I am going to stand on that exact dirt and have it explained to me, at volume, that none of it was ever mine. That winter, I drew the plans myself, at the kitchen table of a rented duplex. On paper, I bought at an office supply store in Jefferson. Kitchen facing east, because I have never in my life wanted a sunset more than I wanted sunrise on my coffee. Porch deep enough for 2 rocking chairs and an argument. A mudroom bench, because my father never had one and complained about it for 40 years. And a round dining table. I drew it round. No head of the table, no foot, no seat where a person sits and decides. I remember shading it in and moving on to the pantry. I did not stop and ask myself why. I was 30 years old and I thought I was choosing a shape. In the corner of every sheet, in the title block where the architect of record signs, I put 2 letters, M, L. I still have those drawings. They ended up mattering more than I ever wanted them to. Larson Build Company started as one woman, a borrowed excavator, and a coffee maker that only worked if you hit it. Then 3 men, then 7. By 2012, it was 9. And I was turning work down. That spring, I drove out to the lumberyard on Route 46 to argue about a delivery that was 4 days late. A man with a famous last name smiled at me across the counter. I didn't know yet that the wallet behind that smile was mostly stationary. Wendell Crane was 51 years old, and he ran that yard. He knew the name of every kid, every dog, and every grandmother in Harrow Bend. He comped my late delivery before I finished complaining about it. Then he asked about my father's chisels. Not about my company, not about my crew. He'd heard somewhere that Anders Larson kept a Swedish set with rosewood handles, and he asked after them the way you ask after somebody's family. Were they holding up? Did I use them or keep them? Had I ever rehandled the half-inch? I stood at that counter for 40 minutes. He courted me slow and old-fashioned. Grocery store flowers, because he said florists were a racket. 11 years later, I'd do the math on that too. A man who tells you he's saving you money is sometimes just a man telling you what he doesn't have. Sunday drives, 8 months in. He walked my 7 acres with me at sunset, got down on one knee in the tall grass on that rise, and said he wanted to grow old right there. I said yes before he finished the sentence. I want to be careful here, because hindsight makes villains out of men who were only weak. He wasn't one. He was kind, and I mean actually kind, not performed. He warmed my hands inside his coat at high school football games, where we had no child playing. He learned my mother's soup the year she died and made it wrong for 3 years until he got it right. Those are facts. I'm not giving them back. Here's what I did not do. I did not look up the Cranes. Crane Lumber went under in 1987. Bankruptcy, Ashtabula County, public record, 4 years before Colton was born. Crane Road got renamed in 1994 for a kid from Kingsville who died overseas. There's a sign up, and the 3rd pew from the front at Harrow Bend Methodist is still called the Crane Pew, like the church carries a warranty on it. That is the entire estate, a bankruptcy, a renamed road, and a bench. I met Harlan Crane exactly twice. The second was a church picnic, paper plates. The summer before the wedding, Harlan had his grandson's shoulder in his hand, and he said it like a blessing and a mortgage at the same time. This one's a Crane. He doesn't have to be smart. He has to be a Crane. I laughed. I was 31, and I thought it was an old man being an old man. It took me 12 years and a conference room to hear what it actually was. It was a job offer, and that boy took it. And he worked it his whole life, and nobody ever told him the company had gone under before he was born. Colton was 23 that afternoon. He shook my hand, called me ma'am, and went back to the potato salad. We married in the spring of 2013. I broke ground that June. Larson Build Company put up every stick of that house. 2014 into 2015. $348,000 in materials and labor, run through my company books, paid from my accounts, framed by my crew, on land I had owned 2 years before Wendell ever knelt in the grass on it. Before the wedding, my lawyer sat me down and talked plain. He was 70, he wore hearing aids, and he'd taken money off my father at poker for 30 years. Keep the deed in your name. Keep the business separate. Sign a simple prenup. Nothing fancy. Protects you both. Wendell signed it at our kitchen table without reading past the first page. He laughed and said, "Paper never kept anybody warm anyway." I remember being relieved. I told myself it meant he wasn't after anything. That same afternoon, he told me to file our taxes separately, so contractor liability could never reach into personal assets. I did that too, 12 years of it, and I was proud of it. Remember that. I'll come back to it. The county assessor had my name, the bank had my name, but at church, at the diner, at the yard, everybody called it the Crane Place, and I let them 12 years. Wendell's chest came up an inch every time somebody said it, and I decided that inch was cheap. Peace is cheaper than credit. I used to say that to myself like a proverb. Signing checks in a kitchen the whole town believed his name had paid for. I want to be honest about something. Nobody stole that name from me. I loaned it out, every single day, on purpose. And I told myself it was generosity. It was avoidance wearing a nicer coat. Colton opened a sports bar at 24. It lasted 14 months. He opened another at 26. Better location, worse math. And that one hung on 3 years before dying. Both times the family story was bad luck, bad partners, bad timing, anything but the boy with the good name. And both times I noticed something I would not let myself understand. Colton would call, and Wendell would take the phone out to the barn and stay gone past dark. He'd come back quiet, kiss the top of my head, and say the boy was figuring it out. I asked once if he needed help. Wendell said, "Nothing you need to worry about, sweetheart." And it was so soft I didn't hear the hinge in the middle of it. Those walks to the barn had a price tag. It would take me 12 years and a folder I never opened to read it. Wendell died on a Tuesday morning in September. At the yard, he'd run for 31 years. Halfway between the office and a pallet of cedar decking. His heart quit before the squad cleared the second light in town. 63 years old. They found him with his tally sheet still in his hand. 41 units of cedar checked off in his own writing. The last 4 checks running downhill. The man who knew everybody left behind a town full of people who each believed they'd known him best. For 1 week, Harrow Bend grieved like a single family. Casseroles stacked in my refrigerator like cordwood. 3 pans of the same funeral potatoes, because nobody coordinates and everybody means it. I want to say something here, because I won't get another chance to be fair to this town. They were good to me that week. Louise Odell mowed my yard without asking. The men from the yard took turns sitting on my porch in the evenings. Not talking, just sitting, the way men do. Then the family showed me the seating chart. Deidre Crane Pruitt is Wendell's older sister, and she is the kind of woman who organizes other people's grief so she can hold the receipt. She called the second morning. "Let me handle everything, honey. You just rest." And I said thank you. That was the most expensive thank you of my life. And I said it in a bathrobe at 7 a.m. because being taken care of felt like being loved. And I hadn't slept in 40 hours. Understand what I gave away in that sentence. In Ohio, the surviving spouse has the say. The funeral home takes its direction from the widow. Nobody took one thing from me that morning. I handed it over. Because I was tired and somebody offered. By Thursday, there was a chart. There were cards on the first pew, cream stock, good font, family only. Colton sat front and center in a suit that still had the store creases down the sleeves. One seat off the aisle, close enough to touch the casket when it came by. Two hands landed on my shoulders and steered me, gently, the way you move a chair. Second row, the widow, second row, looking at the back of a collar sticking up out of a suit that didn't fit. I told myself grief makes people small. I'd had 12 years of practice telling myself things. The pastor said Wendell was the most generous man in the county, and half that room nodded like a loan had just been forgiven. At the graveside, Colton shook hands down a receiving line like a man announcing a campaign. Deidre caught my elbow on the way to the cars and said I would always be a part of this family. Always. She used the word twice. I sat behind my husband's son and my husband's sister, and I did not make a scene. For 11 days, I would have called that dignity. I've since learned there's another word for it, and the word is habit. 4 days after we buried him, my key didn't turn. You know that part. Here's the piece I left out. He hadn't stayed in the apartment over the garage. Somewhere between the graveside and that Thursday, Colton had moved his things down into the house, into our bedroom, the one with the east window I framed myself. My side of the closet was in the bags on the porch. His shirts were hanging where they'd been. He didn't take a spare room. He didn't take the couch. He got into the bed, and then he changed the locks. And when I think about the order of those two things, I still have to set something down. I slept that night at the model cottage on the lot behind my office. We keep it staged for clients. Throw pillows nobody leans on, a bowl of wooden apples, towels stitched to the rack so people can't use them, a sofa built for photographs instead of spines. Harrow Bend has one motel and it's across from the barber shop. I'd rather sleep on a fake couch than let this town count the nights. I lay there in my funeral clothes with a contractor bag of coats for a blanket and did the arithmetic of my life in the dark. 43 years old, widowed 11 days, locked out of a house with my name on the deed, by a man whose name is on nothing. The next morning, Bertie brought the forwarded mail to the office in a rubber band. Halfway down was an envelope from the insurance company. It had been opened and refolded. Colton's handwriting on the front, my name, care of the office. He mailed it to me himself. I have never decided whether that was cruelty or just paperwork. I read it standing at Bertie's desk with my coat still on. $260,000. Paid in full, 12 days after he died. Beneficiary designation signed in 2009. Colton Crane, son. I sat down on a staged couch and did the only arithmetic that mattered. He had $250,000 in his account. On the afternoon, he stacked my winter coats in bags that cost 39 cents. He didn't need my house. He needed to be the man who owned it. Bertie Vance has run my office for 11 years, and my common sense for at least 6 of them. She let herself in at 7 with a foil pan and a legal pad. She didn't ask how I was. Bertie has never once asked me how I am, and it is one of the great kindnesses of my life. The pan went in the refrigerator, the pad went in my hands. 3 lines, in her block printing, call Osgood, call the bank, count the payroll again. I read it twice, and something under my ribs stood up and dusted itself off. Grief hadn't gone anywhere, but I have built in the rain before. At 9 sharp, I was sitting across from the driest lawyer in 3 counties. Vivian Osgood is 66 years old, bills in 6-minute increments, and speaks in sentences that come out already notarized. She read for 16 minutes without making a sound. My deed, the prenup, the construction file, the photocopy Colton had waved on my porch. I memorized her diploma wall and listened to her clock. Then she squared the papers and took her glasses off, which I would learn was her version of a sigh. Let me tell you how many ways you win. Mrs. Larson, the land was yours before the marriage. The house was built by your company. On your dirt, documented to the dollar. The deed has one name on it. The prenup holds. And here's the one nobody's told you. That will was signed in 2009. You married him in 2013. In Ohio, a will that's silent about a spouse who came after, it is a broken instrument. You take your share regardless of what it says. There's a spousal allowance. There's a right to occupy the residence for up to a year. That's the scenario where the house was his. She put the glasses back on. It wasn't. So you don't win by a little. You win by every road on the map. Then why did I sleep under decorative pillows last night? And Vivian Osgood gave me the sentence I would carry into every room for the rest of my life. Because being right and being housed are two different departments, and they do not return each other's calls. I want to stop here, because this is the part people get wrong when they hear it at the diner. They think the question was whether I'd win. It never was. Vivian told me in 16 minutes that I would win. And she was right. And a judge would prove her right inside of 3 months. The question was how long I could stay standing while I was winning. He's petitioned to be appointed administrator of his father's estate, she said. That's routine. He's the son. There's a will, however defective. That isn't the problem. What's the problem? The problem is 2 pages he recorded on Tuesday, his lawyer. And by then he had one, a firm out of Cleveland with its own parking structure. And you can guess whose money paid. That retainer didn't fight my deed. He knew better. He walked into the county recorder's office, not the courthouse, the recorder's, a room with a copier and a woman named Deb who has worked there since Reagan. And he filed 2 pages. A notice of lis pendens, Latin for a suit is pending, $42. I know Deb. I've pulled plats off her counter for 20 years. She stamped it because that's the job. Understand what that is. It doesn't say he owns my house. It says somebody is arguing about it. And it staples itself to my chain of title, where every bank, every insurer, every buyer in America looks first. He couldn't take my house. He never tried. He made it radioactive. How long does it sit there? I asked. Until a judge orders it off. 6 weeks if the docket is kind, longer if it isn't. And in the meantime, Vivian set her pen down. In the meantime, Mrs. Larson, you own a house you cannot borrow against, cannot sell, and cannot enter. How did he have all of this ready? I said. We buried his father 11 days ago. Vivian looked at me over the top of her glasses before she answered. Because he was ready, Mrs. Larson. I was still holding her pen. I set it down very carefully. The way you set down a tool you've just realized is live. First, Ashtabula turned me down on Thursday. I have banked there since I was 22. They financed my first excavator. A loan officer young enough to be my apprentice turned his monitor around and showed me my own address with a flag beside it, and said the words contested collateral, and said them kindly, which somehow made it worse. Tom Halloran. Called Monday and pulled a $240,000 addition off the board. Now just wasn't the season. He said, folks get uneasy about family situations. To be fair to him, and I've had time to be fair to him, we had no signed contract, we had a letter of intent and a handshake at his lake house. which in this county is usually stronger than paper. Usually. Bertie ran the numbers twice. Because I made her 5 weeks of payroll, 9 men. Elias Vargas has a wife due in January, Sunday. I walked into church and sat in the second row without deciding to. My body did it. 12 years is a long time to train a body. Nobody steered me that morning. Nobody had to. I want you to remember that. Because it comes back. His lawyer never attacked my deed. I want you to sit with how smart that is. Because I have had months to admire it, and I still don't like it. The theory was equitable contribution. It didn't claim Wendell owned the house. It claimed his estate had a financial interest in it, that a husband's money had gone into a wife's property for 12 years, and the estate was entitled to some of it back. Vivian said it wouldn't win. She was right. It didn't have to win. It only had to stay alive long enough to keep 2 pages on my title and 9 men off the clock, and then paragraph 9, and I read paragraph 9 4 times. Standing at a counter in a kitchen I had staged for strangers. The decedent withdrew in excess of $84,000 from retirement accounts during the marriage. Petitioner submits these funds were applied to the subject property. That's when I understood I wasn't fighting a boy. I was fighting a boy with a lawyer who had found the one door in my house I had never opened. Read it the way I read it at that counter. It doesn't accuse me of anything. It's polite. It's 4 lines of arithmetic in an expensive font, and it puts a number on the table and asks the court a perfectly reasonable question. If the husband pulled $84,000 out of his retirement during the marriage, where did it go? There was exactly one way to prove that money never touched my foundation. I had to prove where it actually went. Vivian said it plainly, the way she says everything. They are not litigating your title, Mrs. Larson. They are litigating your silence. And they have priced it correctly. I asked her what happens if I simply don't answer paragraph 9. Then it stands unrebutted, she said, and a judge has to weigh it. Thursday night, office empty. Bertie gone home at 5 and the parking lot lights buzzing. There was a folder I had never opened. Wendell's statements, his accounts, the envelopes that came to the house in his name and went into a drawer, because a marriage runs on a certain amount of not looking, and I was fluent in it. Vivian needed the full picture of the estate for probate, so I opened my husband. October 2019. $51,000 out of a 401k. He used to brag about letting ride since the 90s. Early withdrawal, penalty eaten, taxes eaten, sent out in 2 transfers, 8 days apart, Destination Crane and Cobb Hospitality, LLC, Cleveland. The second bar, the good location with the bad math. I sat with that for the while, then I kept going. Because that is what you do, and I found February 2022, 33,000 more. Same routine, same destination, 4 months before the place folded, owing 3 months of rent, $84,000, all those walks out to the barn with the phone, 12 years of coming back quiet and kissing the top of my head. I finally had the transcript. We filed separately, 12 years, married filing separately, because a lawyer told me in 2013 to keep contractor risk away from personal assets, and I did it like a good student. So his 1099-R never crossed my desk, not once. The wall I built to protect my company from him is the same wall that kept me from seeing him at all. I was so proud of that wall. Turns out, I hadn't built a wall. I'd built him a room. I went looking for one more document that night. I found 3. The will. March 2009. The life insurance beneficiary designation, April 2009. The pre-need funeral contract, the one that let Deidre build a seating chart in my church, September 2009. I laid them out on the conference table in a row like 3 boards cut off the same tree. And here's what broke me. And it wasn't betrayal. Betrayal would have been simpler. Betrayal at least requires a man to think about you. Wendell didn't write me out. He just never wrote me in. 12 years of cold hands warmed at football games, and my mother's soup learned by heart. And not one form. Not one afternoon at a kitchen table with a pen. I paid for a house he lived in. I paid for a funeral he had already assigned to somebody else. I was the second row in every document that man ever signed. 6 months earlier, he'd changed the oil in my truck without being asked. He remembered the interval. He remembered which filter. He could hold 100 small things about me in his head for a decade, and he could not hold one afternoon at a desk. I cried for the first time since the funeral. On the floor of a staged living room between a bowl of wooden apples and a dead man's paperwork. Not over Colton. Colton was never worth salt water. I was grieving 2 men, and only one of them got a headstone. There's the Wendell who danced me around a kitchen with a dish towel on his shoulder. That one was real, and I will not let anybody take him, including the other one. And there's the Wendell who let his son call me nothing for 12 years while my checks kept the porch light on, and who protected his pride instead of protecting me and probably told himself, right up to the end, that those were the same thing. Both of those men are in that grave. I buried one of them twice. Vivian answered paragraph 9 on a Tuesday. 2 paragraphs, no exhibits attached. She simply told the Cleveland firm what we would be filing, and she listed the categories by name: retirement account withdrawals, wire transfers, recipient entity. Then she told them it would go on the public docket, because that is where responses go. She didn't send them anything. She told them what was coming. The offer arrived Thursday morning at 7, which is how lawyers serve you breakfast in bed. Vivian forwarded it with one line. Read this standing up. 11 pages of Cleveland letterhead. 4 terms. 1. Colton vacates immediately, withdraws every petition, and quitclaims any interest in the property. The house comes back to me. Keys by Friday. 2. I pay Colton $60,000. Styled a legacy settlement in recognition of his familial expectations. 3. Both parties execute a joint statement, for the record and for the Gazette, affirming that the home and the estate reflect the lifetime of work and generosity of Wendell Crane. 4. And read 4 slowly, because 4 is the load-bearing one. All financial exhibits are sealed by agreement. Both parties are barred from discussing private family finances in perpetuity, penalty attached, forever, 72 hours to accept. I read it twice at the counter of a kitchen staged to look lived in. They had stopped pretending there was a fortune. They weren't buying the house, they were buying the story back, and they wanted me to sign the lie this time, not just keep quiet about it. My silence they'd always had for free. Now they wanted my signature on it. Otis Beaudry called at 9. He's 74. He sold my father lumber for 30 years. And he sold me my first pallet of shingles on a Saturday when I had no business buying it. He hadn't said one word through any of this. He didn't say much now. I pulled your deed at the recorder's. Papers is papers. Maren, yours checks out. You're back on 30-day terms with us. Effective this morning. That was the entire call. I'd rank it in the top 5 of my life. 30-day terms meant materials without cash up front. Materials meant I could take the 2 kitchen remodels Bertie had been holding on a sticky note for 11 days, which meant payroll went from 5 weeks to 9. It wasn't rescue. Nobody was coming to rescue me. And I'd stopped waiting for that somewhere around the second row. It was traction. Traction you can build on. That afternoon, I got the crew together in the yard and gave it to them straight. Money's tight. Work's coming back, but it isn't back yet. Any man who needs steadier ground walks with a reference and no hard feelings. And I'll make the calls myself. Nobody moved. Then Elias Vargas, hands in his pockets, said it. We built that house, boss. We know whose it is. I had to turn around and look at a truck for a second. 9 men who had never once been asked to defend me had just done the thing my church, my in-laws, and my husband's estate could not do. They said whose it was. Out loud. In a parking lot. For free. 12 years I had paid good money for this town to call it the Crane Place. It cost these men nothing to call it mine. Deidre called that night. First time since the funeral. No hello. You're tearing this family apart. Is that what Wendell would want? I didn't raise my voice, and this time it wasn't habit. I'm not tearing anything. Deidre, I'm returning it. Signed for. She hung up. I sat down at the office with a legal pad and drew 2 columns. Because that is how I have solved every hard thing since I was 19. Sign, don't sign. Under sign the house this week. Warm, mine, 9 men safe. The fight over, every casserole in Harrow Bend coming back with an apology tucked under the foil. Under don't sign months more of it. A public accounting read by strangers. The family gone for good. And the man I loved remembered by his balance sheet instead of his laugh. There was no clean column. That's the thing nobody tells you about the truth. It comes with an invoice, too. My father's plumb bob sat on the desk where I'd left it. I picked it up, let it hang off the edge, and watched it come to a stop. I sat there until the parking lot lights cut off on their timer, and then I understood what I was actually being offered. They were not offering me my house back. They were offering me my old job back, carrying the Crane name quietly at my own expense, with a raise. Let me stop one breath. If somebody ever counted on your silence as part of their budget, if you've ever signed the checks and still sat in the second row, type the word plum in the comments. Not for the algorithm. Because I want to see how many of us there are. Subscribe if you're staying, because what happened in that conference room is the reason I'm telling you any of this. Vivian laid it out first. They've asked for family witnesses. I objected. The mediator allowed it because both sides consented. Maren, this isn't procedure. It's a stage. He doesn't need you to sign. He needs them to watch you sign. Do you want to walk in there? Yes, he picked the audience. I'm just going to use it. I packed 1 banker's box, plumb bob on top. There was a chair at the head of the table with a card that said my name. And I walked right past it and put my hand on the second one before I caught myself. I stood there with my hand on the wrong chair while 11 cranes watched. And then I moved down and I sat where the card said. It took maybe 2 seconds. It was the hardest 2 seconds in this entire story, and not one person in that room knew it happened. At the county seat, Cleveland read the terms and said generosity twice. Then Colton spoke. We're being generous here. Dad would want the house to stay in the family. I set the plumb bob on the oak. Then I opened the box. My father's name is on this land. You were the woman who lived here. You said that on my porch 4 days after I buried your dad. So before I answer, we're going to do what this family has never done with money. Say it out loud. June 2011, 74,000, 7 acres, sole funds. 2 years before I met your father, 20. 14 to 2015, 348,000, 47 invoices, paid, taxes and insurance. 11 years, 1 checkbook, October 2019 and February 2022. 84,000, wired to Crane and Cobb. And one more thing, because I want this room to be accurate. I never filed a claim on your father's life insurance. Not one page. Check the docket, it isn't there. $260,000. And it's yours. And it always was. So let's be clear. I didn't touch a dollar of what your father left you. You're sitting in a rented suit asking me for the last brick of what he didn't. The answer is no. Names get inherited. Houses get built. Deidre's cup stopped halfway to her mouth and stayed there. "If the house isn't Crane," he said, and his voice came out at a size I had never heard him use. "Then what was I?" And for 1 second, and it did not survive to 2, I saw him whole. A boy handed a famous name like a paycheck that would never cash. The name hadn't only robbed me, it had raised him. I slid the key to his father's toolbox across the oak, and the claim ticket for the folded flag. "You can keep your father, Colton, the watch, the tools, whichever version of him you can live with. That's yours, and I'll never touch it. You can't keep my house." He took the key, stood, buttoned the suit that finally fit, and walked out. No apology. I want to be clear about that, because this isn't that kind of story. He just stopped billing me for one. It ended without agreement. Nothing sealed. I drove to the courthouse and sat in the lot 40 minutes. Setting that box on the counter meant permanent, public, no taking it back. And by Friday, everyone in Harrow Bend would know Wendell Crane died in debt in his wife's house. I carried the box in with both arms. Like a man carries a load, he's finally stopped pretending is light. The clerk asked if I wanted a stamped copy. I said yes. I still have it. 3 weeks later, the court struck the house from the estate and gave him 14 days. He left on the 9th. The key was in my mailbox. No note. The fight cost $21,000. I took down the Crane family tree, drove a fresh nail, and hung the plumb bob where it had been. There's no head of the table in my house. It's round. I drew it that way in a rented duplex before I ever met him, and I never once asked myself why. There's a girl in my office now, 19. She asked why the plumb bob over my fireplace has somebody else's letters on it. So here's the part I actually need you to hear. And then I'll let you go. This week, not someday. Pull 3 pieces of paper, the deed to wherever you sleep, the beneficiary line on every account and policy in your house, and whatever document says who buries you. Not because somebody is coming for you. In my case, nobody was. There was no villain in 2009. There was a good man who never went back and typed my name in, and a boy who found the gap 15 years later and walked straight through it. A name is what somebody hands you. It can be taken back, argued over, spent. Paper that tells the truth is the only thing on this earth nobody can inherit out from under you. Go read the comments under this one and count the plums. That's how many houses somebody else's name is sitting on tonight. Then go check your paper. I'll wait.